Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei zui. E ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. E te rangatira, wira, gardener, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai rā. Ka aroha nui ki te whānau pani I tēnei wā pauri. Ngā mana whenua, ka nui te mihi kia koutou. E ngā iwi o ngā haue whā, nau mai, haru mai I runga I te kaupapa o te ata. Ko ai au, ko Luisa tōku ingoa, no te rarua, te aupauri, Ngāti whātua, ngā puhi nui tonu, Ngāti Hāmoa, Ngāti whiti hoki. Kua hau te kaihononga o te māngai o te kāwanatanga o Amerika ki Aotearoa. Ke te tino hariko te ngākau ki te kitea tō koutou kānohi a tāhua I tēnei ata. Piki mai, kakia mai, haere mai. He ino I tātou. Pakataka te hau ki te uru. Pakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki uta. Kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te tākura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei mauri ora. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It gives me great honor and it's such a privilege to be able to get us started this morning in the language of my ancestors, the Māori people of Aotearoa. I welcome you to this kōrero, this dialogue about this important kaupapa, this important topic. Who am I? I'm Luisa, and I am the Cultural Affairs Coordinator at the US Consulate General in Auckland, in Tāmaki Makaurau. And a little bit about my words this morning. I welcomed all of you as the people who have been brought here by the four winds. So no matter who you are or where you come from, I offer you my words of welcome. I also sent out acknowledgements to those of us who have, those people who have passed on, including a great leader in Māoridom, Wira Gardner, who passed away, and I sent my love and my blessings to his family who are grieving right now, and also all of Māoridom who are mourning the loss of this great leader. I sent out acknowledgements to ngā mana whenua, the people of this area that I'm so blessed to live and work in here in Auckland, but I also send out my acknowledgements to the native people of all of the places that you all are joining us from this morning. So thank you so much for joining me. I started off with a little blessing, a karakia, just to get us started in the right way, honoring the protocols of this land. And my blessing was harks back to our people, our Pacific people as people of the ocean, fishermen, navigators, and this was a blessing that was done before they would set out on a journey, when they would check the elements to make sure that everything was favorable for the journey that they were about to embark on. And so I share those words with all of us this morning, clearing the way so that we can have a kōrero, a dialogue today that is safe, and that is productive. And so that is it from me. Thank you so much. It's great to have your presence here this morning, and I'll pass it over to Nathan to carry us on this journey.
Tēnā koe, Luisa, ngā mihi kia koe. Tēnā tātou katoa, huri tēnei no Ngāti Whātua, no ngā puhi huki. Ko wai taku ingoa, ko Neitha Rāhui taku ingoa, ko tētahi o ngā kaimahi ki te whare wānanga o Waikato, ko te kaiwhakahari mo te hōtaka, ko te hononga ākiwa. So greetings to you all today. It's exciting for us to join this session today, and sending out all our greetings to wherever you are in the world today. It's currently 11 a.m. here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so I'm not sure what the time is wherever you are, but yeah, greetings for your day. But yes, welcome to our session today, Creating, Growing and Sustaining Indigenous Studies Programs across the Pacific region, uplifting Indigenous voices. This webinar is part of the Internationalization of Higher Education series, jointly organized by the Department of State's USA Study Abroad branch. These activities support US study abroad and are funded by the US government through a study abroad engagement grant from USA Study Abroad within the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. US Department of State. We will now hear a few words from Angela Kennedy, the Public Affairs Officer for the US Department of State at the Auckland Post.
Kia ora. Thank you, Nathan, for that. And thank you, Louisa, for your heartfelt karakia. That was beautiful. I'm just honestly delighted to be here and introduce this session on Indigenous Study Exchange. And so pleased to see how many people have already joined us from across the Pacific today. Some words from the late Congressman Benjamin Gilman. He said, study abroad is an experience for every student who participates. Living and learning in a vastly different environment of another nation not only exposes our students to alternative views, but it also adds an enriching social and cultural experience. It also provides our students with the opportunity to return home with a deeper understanding of their place in the world. It encourages them to be a contributor rather than a spectator in the international community. And it's true that international education has the power to change lives. It changed mine. I studied abroad in Senegal when I was in college, and I realized I wanted to be the kind of person that creates space and opportunity for others to interact with the world outside of their own. And that's why I'm a diplomat today. And it's our shared duty as educators, as community leaders, and public servants to create that space for Indigenous students and scholars to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. So today, we might be asked to reflect. How are we being intentional in our support of Indigenous students? How are we growing our understanding of Indigenous matters? And we are reflecting here too. I am not the expert here, but I hope that we can add some value through thoughtful connection, through our skills and our networks across the Pacific and the US. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken recently visited the region, and he said that the Indo-Pacific is the most dynamic region in the world, and the future here affects people everywhere. The United States is working to modernize our longstanding alliances, strengthen emerging partnerships, and forge innovative links to meet today's most urgent challenges, and there are quite a few of those. All of that, though, relies on trust and on those meaningful connections that we're trying to build and on shared knowledge. So there's a Hawaiian proverb that reads, makahane ka ike, maka ike ka mana, which means through work comes knowledge, and through knowledge comes strength. As educators, we understand that part of the responsibility of receiving knowledge is to be mindful of how that knowledge is then shared. This proverb tells us that true power is found in using the knowledge we have to serve our world. So thank you all for being here, for being willing to learn and willing to share with us and with each other. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers and the thoughtful dialogue that follows. This is your space, but on behalf of the Department of State's USA Study Abroad branch and the US Mission here in New Zealand, Australia, and Fiji, welcome. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Angela, thank you very much. Yes, like I said at the start of our session, my name is Nathan and I will be the moderator for today's session. Super excited to have everyone here. So I currently work at the University of Waikato here in Hamilton, New Zealand. And I lead a Māori business program that takes our Māori tertiary students and we engage them with the Asia Pacific region. And primarily connecting them with Indigenous businesses from the Asia Pacific region to build their own Indigenous and Māori business capability. But that's enough out of me. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our two panelists today to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the questions. Just some quick housekeeping. Yeah, we could just ask if you can leave your mics on mute. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. There were a lot of questions that come through and we have very limited time. So what we've tried to do is try to collate them into some more general questions that we'll ask our panel today to try and cover as much as we can. But we also have our breakout sessions where hopefully we can have a bit more of a wānanga or a talk together. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Tyler.
Tēnā tātou, huru tēnei no Aotearoa, no tūhoi e mihi ana ki a koutou, ko Tyler Tikiri tōku ingoa, and he kaimahi hoki ahau I te whare wānanga o Waikato. So yes, blessings, greetings, morning, afternoon to everyone. My name is Tyler. I work alongside Nathan here at the University of Waikato in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm from a tribe called Tuhoi, but born and bred here in Waikato. And I guess just a bit of background or context as to how I got into the mahi, or where my passion comes from in this space. So to put sort of 20 odd years of schooling into a minute, yeah, I guess throughout schooling, I was very fortunate that I come from a background of teachers, so I had a huge whānau support throughout my entire schooling, which I think was crucial in me finishing schooling. Unfortunately, a lot of my school peers didn't necessarily have the same outcome in regards to schooling. So through my education here at the university, it sort of brought to light a lot of the inequities that Māori face in our education system historically and still presented today, which I'm sure is relatable for a lot of us, especially our Indigenous and our sort of minor communities throughout the world. And so, yeah, to relate it to my mahi, my work, so I work on a couple of projects. It's called CAPE, Centre of Asia Pacific Excellence. And so in an essence, I look at global citizenship education, but what that means from a Te Ao Māori perspective, an Indigenous perspective. And so 2 parts, sort of creating an educational resource around what global citizenship means. And then another part is offering regional summits to rangatahi, so our Māori youth, around, you know, what they see the importance in global citizens and how they can sort of create a better future than what, you know, some of the current issues we have. But yes, I'll leave it there and I'll pass it over to Tai. Kia ora.
Mahalo, Tyler. Aloha mai kako, mai ke ia aino pili pili, I ka makani ka hau kane me ka ua tuahine ma Oahu, pai aina o Hawaii. He leo aloha ke ia mai Hawaii ai Aotearoa, e nā hoa o ka moana nui a kea, a me nā hoa ke ia honua puni. Aloha, my name is Tai Kavika Tengan. I'm zooming in here from the Aina, the lands of Pili Pili, a traditional place name for one of the spots on our University of Hawaii Manoa campus, where I teach in ethnic studies and anthropology. Just to again voice my aloha to the hosts in Aotearoa, all the relations across the Pacific, Moana Nui Akea, and everyone wherever you are joining us from. I originally am from Maui, Wai'ehu, but now living in Waioma'o in Palolo. And got into my field of study really around questions of identity as an undergraduate. When I was at Dartmouth, I see some of my Dartmouth friends here too, or at least one, was really inspired by some of the connections with other Native American students who I got to be in a shared community with. At the time also was able to do a foreign studies program in Kenya. So had that sort of international exchange experience. All of those at the same time that in back home in Hawaii, there was a major move to really assert sovereignty, to reclaim control over our lands and government. We, have really a long history under U.S. occupation that we see as illegal in what we claim still is the Hawaiian Kingdom, although Native Hawaiians as a minority numerically and politically have not realized the same kinds of gains in control and re-control of our places. We have seen tremendous growth in our reclaiming of knowledges and land-based practices and restoration of community and kuleana or responsibilities. Much of that also in conversation dialogue with our Pacific cousins, and especially those in Aotearoa, but also elsewhere. So my own research has been on issues of Hawaiian masculinities and its place in the Hawaiian movement today. Currently looking at some of the stories of Native Hawaiian veterans. But I've also, aside from that, been very dedicated to developing community-based Indigenous research methodologies and ethnography and oral history in particular. And also connected with that, developing Hawaiian leadership opportunities for especially our undergraduates here in one program, which I'll speak to again later, Nā Ko'oko'o, which in addition to connecting students to communities and struggles here has also opened up opportunities for working more broadly internationally, as we've hosted some First Nations leaders from Canada and also have sent down some students to Aotearoa. I've also been involved with another partnership, which I'll briefly mention later, which really kind of came out of University of Auckland. Is called Te Wharekura, is an international Indigenous partnership. And it resulted in an Indigenous health training program called Mahina Project, which I wasn't involved so much with that, but I was involved in some of the early stages and really developing the connections and relationship building. So that's it for me. I will pass it back to Nathan.
Well, thank you, Korua. Well, we'll jump straight into it because I'm looking at the time and we're already ticking away. So my first question goes to you, Tyler. So and perhaps even as a recent graduate or soon to be master's graduate, what cultural and intentional support are students at Te Whare Wānanga or Waikato given to help with their study or program? And then also, how do you implement those in the programs that you run?
Yes, so if I sort of, start with my student hat as such, because it leads into my current work. So here at the University of Waikato, I was fortunate enough, we have a Māori leadership program. And so through that, it sort of opened up like a lot of learnings from the program itself, but also opportunities within that space. So it had this real emphasis around the power of people that, through our relationships and our connections, the opportunities and the learnings are, limitless. And so in that space, I was fortunate again to travel or be part of a small cohort that we engaged with a couple of universities in Arizona and in British Columbia, Kamloops. And I guess in an essence, why I share that is because it was an Indigenous-led program, and just, it's things that you can't necessarily get from readings or, sitting in a lecture, and just the opportunities in that space. Like I said, there were many and plenty. And so I guess in terms of the mahi I currently do, first off, the relationships that I've gained throughout the opportunities like that leadership program, I would actually put down to that's how I landed the job that I'm currently in, is through the relationships. But then also, because part of my work is connecting with our Indigenous communities in the Asia Pacific region, it's through having that sort of international experience. It's sort of somehow innately developed skills for me to engage in Indigenous international conversations. Had I not been exposed to those sorts of opportunities, it's uncertain as to, would I have even thought about the possibility of connecting, Māori students here in Aotearoa with our whānau, our family over in our Asia Pacific region. So that's in a that's it in a tiny nutshell.
Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, Ty, similar question for you around cultural support for the students, but maybe with, as Tyler sort of started alluding to, around leadership. So how is Indigenous leadership and knowledge implemented in the teaching or the programs that you're running or teaching on?
Thanks. So currently at here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, there's, and I guess even more broadly within our UH system, there's been a strategic focus on becoming a Native Hawaiian place of learning, which raises some eyebrows in the context of the university also pursuing development of a 30-meter telescope on a sacred mountaintop. That being said, it has created differing, if perhaps contested, opportunities for support for different offices, departments, and programs that advance Hawaiian learning and support for students. Here where ethnic studies and anthropology, my two departments, are located, we're in the College of Social Sciences, and we've, among our Hawaiian faculty, really in response to the broader administration's efforts to really own up to its responsibilities to the Hawaiian people and places, created this Hawaiian leadership program I referenced earlier called Nā Ko'oko'o. In Hawaiian, the ko'oko'o is the walking staff. Actually, I've got one here. Here's my ko'oko'o. And it's also kind of seen as a model for leadership through support in being grounded in place, which is what enables one to stand up strong and help communities, but also to be mobile and moving. And so the program received funding from, we have a Native Hawaiian Student Services office, our college, our provost has started to dedicate some support there. A lot of this was happening right before COVID. COVID happened and kind of messed up a lot of things. But the program really has seen support from multiple units and faculty who have taken opportunities to lead some of our own youth that are here, and then connecting them with others across the Pacific. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll briefly kind of just mention that as something that kind of touches on a few of these themes and also informs my own teaching as I've grown, I think, tremendously in seeing the students themselves take up those responsibilities and become ko'oko'o on their own.
Thank you. Just both of you have mentioned leadership programs that are happening at your institutions. So I'm going to ask you a big question with a short amount of time to answer. But what do you think, I suppose, is the key difference that you both see with Indigenous leadership programs compared to maybe other programs that are run in other institutions that don't have that focus on Indigenous? I'll start with you, Ty.
Sure. I think really this focus on Indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, land, and the well-being of Indigenous communities, and really putting Indigenous leaders in decision-making roles, and teaching them how to make decisions based on a collective, the collective well-being of communities, nations, places, has been really one of the guiding things in our own thinking, which really articulates well with a number of other, I think, institutions that foreground Indigenous well-being and leadership. I mentioned also, I think earlier, that it's a little bit separate from this leadership program I'm talking about, but another partnership I've been involved with was with this Te Wharekura that really came out of University of Auckland. But part of the language in the MOU that we set up with them, I think, really points to key aspects of Indigenous leadership as well as partnerships. And so I'm just reading just a couple of quotes from this. It's meant, this particular program, Te Wharekura, was meant to develop a broad international network of scholars that would produce different things, exchanges with students, conferences, research projects, so forth. But the first line is to uplift the mana. Mana is our term for power and authority. To uplift the mana and aspirations of Indigenous peoples in their communities. There's a bunch of other language about who's involved, but the different units agree to work effectively in this partnership with the key principles that influence it, being decisions fulfilled by consensus and leadership in research excellence and scholarly endeavors, informed by Indigenous values of respect, generosity, hospitality, sharing, tolerance, honesty, and patience. So really informed programs looking to Indigenous ideas and values, but this term mana, right, really the first key signal, one of something that resonates, I think, well, and really is about leadership in our people coming from the spiritual, ancestral, land-based connections.
Oh, well, thank you, Ty. Yeah, Tyler?
Cool. I think simply put, what, say, an Indigenous focused and sort of centered program offers that is different is that, say, for instance, in a Māori context, if it is sort of centralized around Māori values, beliefs, worldviews, that rather than a lot of other programs that have a splash or an element of culture, that actually programs that are centralized around Indigenous or indigeneity as such, like they are the sort of main course as such, rather than, with other programs, them being like the appetizer as such. Yeah.
I like that. Yep. Great analogies there, Tyler. I think that leads nicely into our next question, though. So I know in a lot of universities, we have a lot of great Indigenous staff who work with our Indigenous students, and we also have a lot of great allies wanting to work with our Indigenous students and create programs that are rich for them. So what do you both think is important for others who are wanting to start a program to include an Indigenous educational or Indigenous leadership or excellence? I'll throw it back to you, Tyler.
I think it's one integral part, and I'm sure we all know it, is the importance of relationships, but more so authentic relationships, and that, when you're building these relationships, that you sort of, there's a long term in it, and there's that nature of reciprocity, that you're not just sort of take, but actually what are you giving, so that, you're sort of built on mutual respect. That's probably a key thing, I think, that is integral in that space.
Awesome, thank you. Ty?
Just like Tyler said, I mean, the relationships that are based in reciprocity, mutual respect, really are the cornerstone. I think the really explicit commitments to bettering Indigenous communities and lands really needs to be shared at all levels. So not only people who are putting the programs together, but really and seriously by the administration and also informed by and involving the leadership in the community. These programs need to really be done and planned out collaboratively, taking guidance and cues from those who are on the ground. Really, if you're seeking to help these communities, it's usually the people who are doing the work who have those answers already on what they need. So making sure that that's part both of the planning, but also the accountability mechanisms that are put into place when these programs finally get up and running, and also really having that consistent support from the administration so that they don't just throw a little bit of money at it in a couple of years and then kind of expect it to happen afterwards. So those are some of the things I've seen and have encountered with the different programs I've been a part of.
Yeah, awesome. And I suppose the topic of this conversation too is around study abroad. So creating programs for Indigenous students in particular to study abroad. So based in Hawaii and Aotearoa, New Zealand. What do you think for students who are even traveling to our countries or in Hawaii, Tai? For students who are traveling to your place, what do you think is important for them to learn about the country that they're going to be traveling to, or the land that they're going to be traveling to in particular? And I'll start with you, Tai, if that's all right.
So again, Hawaii, it's not a vacation spot or a destination. It's a kingdom under U.S. occupation. Its indigenous people are Kanaka Uiwi or Kanaka Maoli, two terms that are used now, who have persisted and continued to endure against forces of militarism, tourism, and dispossession, but also have thrived in especially recent years in taking up these ancestral responsibilities or kuleana to care for their homelands and communities. It's important that one does their homework to understand the place that they're going into and the struggles that are ongoing. In back of me, I have one of the posters of one of the struggles right now. Shut down Red Hill for good. It's a military fuel tank, a series of tanks that were constructed in World War II to hold jet fuel that had been leaking into our aquifer. Recently, the Pentagon said it was going to shut it down and defuel them, but that was only after dozens of family members that were living in military housing got really sick, even though Hawaiians, as well as other allies, have been raising the alarm for many years. It is a multi-ethnic place. We have a long history that's brought many peoples here, some more than others who are dedicated to this place. But really thinking about what it is to be a responsible visitor is what we try to instill. There's a recent book that came out called Detours, a Decolonial Guide to Hawaii. A couple of my colleagues helped to publish. It's sort of the anti-tour book that really is not so much an invitation to come, but really an invitation to be more respectful if you're wanting to ask permission to come. So that's one thing that I think is out there. And it's those values of reciprocity and connection that we try to instill in those that we do want to host and are offering to work in a good way with our communities, with our students, with our institution. And again, in some of the experiences I had, especially when we hosted some of the First Nations Indigenous leaders from Canada in our Hawaiian leadership program, there was that deep spirit of knowing that they're guests, but also wanting to connect with us on those deeper struggles that we were facing. And likewise, when our students went to Aotearoa back in 2019 as part of a delegation, they went to the NISA, Native American Indigenous Studies Association conference over there at Waikato. So that was part of it, knowing how to be a good guest too, and thinking about deeper connections beyond the kind of colonial period, but also what connects us as people of the Pacific.
Awesome. I'll be adding that book to my reading list too. And I'm just looking at the time. As Māori, we're always going against the grain and not sticking to time. We call time a colonial measure in our office, but that's just our excuse for being late. But on that note, I've also asked if we can just have a few more minutes to just continue with this kōrero, because I think it's so rich. So we'll carry on for a few more minutes if that's all right with everyone. Then we'll jump into the breakout rooms. I'll give you the chance to still talk. But Tyler, I'll just quickly throw it over to you too. Same question, just around being a good guest, or what's key for students who are joining a program, what the key things that they should be learning. Sorry.
Yeah. I think just to reiterate what Tai had said, the importance of knowing your place, that, if you're a manuhiri, you're a guest in other countries, do your homework, learn their histories, talk to someone that's visited, whatever, just to sort of do a bit of prep work, I guess. But then when you visit, that's not to say, oh, actually, no, Google told me this. If anything, it's, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, but make sure you go with your homework. But yeah, that's probably just, support what Tai said.
Yes, stay away from Google. I agree. And it goes back to what you've said about you both said about relationship building and connections. So totally agree. So before we do jump into the breaker rooms, sort of as a wrap up question. So now that we've sort of started this conversation, how can we continue these conversations and stay connected and build programs that are sustainable, I guess? And on no particular order, Tyler.
Yeah, I think I'm just very cautious around, we attend these webinars, we attend meetings or whatnot, and sometimes the conversation is left there, or, we tick it as if, yeah, I've sort of gained a bit of insight into that space. For me, I think if, we're genuine in our efforts and we actually want to create change in our spaces, whatever that may look like, then how can connections like today going forward, what does that look like? How can we keep each other accountable? So I guess, yeah, that for me is something that I think we could all think about, yeah, going forward past this 1 hour we have together.
Thank you. And Ty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to those relationships and finding whatever ways there are to sustain them. This is really, if we're talking specifically about this seminar, or if we're just talking broadly about what it is to maintain relationships over time, I mean, it takes work. It takes kind of returning to and building on those points of connection and strengthening them, to imagine those futures beyond the present, those futures that foreground Indigenous values, peoples, communities, and to keep that vision in mind and to continue to bring people into those conversations. I guess not a very set of specific ideas here, but I do think that if there are interests perhaps that are expressed here or even in the breakout rooms to build on something, I would really encourage them, whether it's with us or with each other as you connect, to then kind of move on it.
Absolutely. And I know, speaking from our own perspective, we're always looking for new partners to create something magical with. I've just seen a question come through in the chat, so we'll ask it before we go into the breakout room, from Louisa. And she said, I'd like to hear what panelists think of the term Indigenous. We try to use language that is inclusive and positive for all, but other terms like Native or people of color also don't cover all the groups we may want to cover. Would anyone like to have a go at tackling that?
I mean, I'll say I use it as a way of identifying who the first peoples of a place are, and that there are histories that precede the kind of colonial present. And not all of them have identifiable Indigenous peoples in every country and location. And so the term kind of moves in different ways based on where you are. But it is to signal that, that there are prior occupants in place, especially within settler colonies. And for me, I also try to, as much as I can, really recognize what those histories are and how they differ. And in some places, it's more important to understand the different groups that are variously claiming Indigenous status, and to understand their relationship to the state, and to understand where people refuse the term Indigenous and Native, and instead really assert terms in their own language and their own culture, and to honor that. So, and for the purpose of this, I think, discussion, we're going with Indigenous, but clearly, right, if we're in Aotearoa, you'd want to know who the mana whenua are and who to properly address when asking for permission.
Awesome, thank you, Ty. Tyler, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that was pretty well put. So time conscious, I'll leave it there.
Ka pai. So what we're going to do now, whānau, family, is we're going to go into the breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask Michael if he can put the questions that we're going to discuss, or wānanga as we say in New Zealand, in the breakout rooms. There's a couple of questions. The first being, how are you being intentional with your support for Indigenous students? and how are you growing your awareness and understanding of Indigenous matters? So yeah, this is your opportunity to sort of discuss what everyone's maybe doing, and then when we've got around 5 minutes left, we'll come back into the group and do a bit of a feedback session and talk about what was discussed. So I'm going to ask Michael to set those rooms up, and there we go. And I just said to our group in our breakout room, we could sit here for hours all day discussing this, and I can just see that everyone's passionate, which is the even greater point around making sure that if you are keen to continue these conversations, then continue the conversations and get in touch with those who you'd like to continue them with. So we'll just do a quick little wrap up. I'll give you guys 30 seconds each to try and encompass what you talked about in your breakout room. And then we'll do our final karaki and close. So Ty, I'll start with you.
Okay, 30 seconds on.
Yes.
We opened with acknowledgements, land acknowledgements that were shared, and also understanding that these are important to understand the responsibilities that flow from them, and not to see them only as just what some institutions offer as kind of pretty shallow acknowledgements, but the histories that come from them, including the responsibility to understand the different Indigenous nations within, even perhaps before looking at the exchanges across and without, understanding that we need to move at a different kind of relational time and in different relational spaces than what the university will give us with their timelines and silos. And Natalie, I think, was going to offer one last thing before we just got cut off. Natalie, you want to jump in real fast?
I don't want to take up a lot of space. I was just saying that I noticed the thread of programming aiming to equip students to grow in empathy and understanding for neighbors close and far away.
Awesome, thank you. And if you do need to leave, feel free to take off, but otherwise, if you can to stay on, we'll only be a couple more minutes. Tyler?
In 30 seconds, we talked about, some of the amazing support and programs offered in the Indigenous space in particular. And I think, that, some of us on a personal level are, doing our bit of homework to ensure that, we're actually walking the talk. And then, we're also keen to see, I guess, what from here, so to speak. But that's us in a short.
Perfect, thank you, Tyler. Yes, and in our room too, we talked about a lot, but making sure that there's actually a space at the university to come together. Sometimes it may start small. There's a lot of us in universities or institutions who don't maybe have the greatest support, so making sure starting small, starting with relationships is key. Also, looking at the sort of when institutions are talking about how they're supporting Indigenous or Native students and actually challenging them on that and making sure that they're being authentic with their approaches, and making sure it's not just a tick box, so that they've got their values up there, I guess, to say that they're doing it, but actually pushing back and saying, if you're doing it, then make sure you do it properly, I guess. That's it in a very brief nutshell. We have run out of time, unfortunately. I can see the chat going crazy with different contacts and everything. So I see that Michael's going to also put out a survey if you're happy to share your contact details with everyone. I'm sure, hey, if we could do this again, that'll be amazing. So also, I think Michael will send out some more info if you're interested in what Ty and Tyler spoke about today, about any of our programs. He can put it in a nice little package. I haven't told him that yet. But I just want to thank everyone for jumping on the session today. It's been an amazing hour. Can't believe it's only been an hour, but hopefully we can continue some of these dialogues and connect. We've got all these contacts around the world now. But I'm going to hand it over to Ty to close us for today.
Okay. Mahalo, iau ko ke ako ko mai. Mahalo na kua na omakua na kupuna no ke ia papahana nui, ke ka anlike o ka manao me ka mana, no ko kako poe o iwi o ke ia honua nei. Nā ko e alakai a kiai I ka hoi ana me ke kukulu ho ana, I nā pulokalamu, nā papahana, nā hana, e holomo ai ko kako poe o iwi. Just a huge mahalo to all of those ancestor spirits that are guiding us and brought us here into this space and with the intention of sending us back with that protection and inspiration to continue to build for all of our Indigenous peoples and all peoples wherever you may be. So mahalo nui.
Thank you, Tai. And just as you finished, the sun came shining out of the clouds, so must be a sign. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day or evening wherever you are, and stay in touch. Ka kite.